My name is Leonard Kozianski. I'm an artist. This is my studio. Welcome to my studio. And I'd like to talk today about a painting that I finished recently called Birds of a Feather. It's an oil painting, sort of a medium-sized oil painting. And it was a challenge for me because it was a painting that evolved. Many of the ideas that I get for paintings, they come to me in a fairly complete form. But this one came to me sort of in an incomplete form, and it had to evolve over time. I had to make changes to it as the painting progressed. In a sense, I had to listen to the painting tell me what it wanted to be. Because when we make a painting, when we create any work of art, we're taking an idea, an inspiration, and we're transforming it into materials, into physical materials. And that transforms the idea, structures the idea. The materials have a way of shaping the idea as it becomes this physical reality, which is the painting or the sculpture or the poem or whatever we're creating. So we're taking something that's sort of vague in our minds and turning it into something that's very specifically physically real. And uh, so I had to listen to the painting and I had to allow it to develop over time. And I had to be persistent because at first I was a little bit discouraged by the painting. And I turned it upside down, turned it to the wall, and you know, eh, it's tempted to give up on it, but I persisted, and I'm really glad I did because it ended up being one of the best paintings I've done recently. Well, let's take a look at it. Well, here's the painting. It's 42 inches high by 26 inches wide, oil on canvas, and a medium-sized painting. It's a surrealist painting in that it represents my the visual appearance of things as well as my sort of emotional reconstruction of them. This represents my daily life. This is how I begin my day. I begin my day with a run through Annapolis, Maryland here every day. And when I often begin my run, it can be dark outside, dawn, and then when I finish, it'll be full daylight. So there's a passage of time that takes place as I do my morning run. And I wanted to sort of create that sense of the passage of time in this painting. And so there is that shift from the background to the foreground. There's also lots of things happening within the painting that imply time. And uh, but this painting began, as so many of my paintings begin, here in my sketchbook. Okay, and so I draw my ideas out in my sketchbook first to get an idea of what the composition is going to be like. I use a ballpoint pen and I use a whiteout pen to make corrections. And so and this is the drawing. This is the first drawing that I did. And as you can see in the lower left, I've changed the figure. Let's look at the previous one. There. Okay, let's look at that previous. Oh, no, here we are. Okay, this is the first uh, drawing, and you can see the figure is running out of the picture, and the roof is a large empty shape. And there's not much happening in the middle ground. Okay. Well, then in the next drawing, what I did, the first major change I did was I changed the direction of the runner from going out of the picture to going into the picture. Now, when I'm painting, I'm working on the painting, I'm working on the canvas, but I'm also working on the drawing, continuing to work on the drawing. And what I will often do is I'll make a photocopy of the drawing, and then I'll, make maybe several photocopies, and then try, experiment with different things on the original drawing using the pen and the whiteout pen. And so one of the first changes I made was to change the direction of the runner going into the picture. And I like that a lot better. I also added some figures off in the middle distance, some small figures. I didn't know quite what they would be yet, but I wanted those figures to be there. I had the bicyclist in there, and I still hadn't put in the smoke yet. I noticed that that roof is fairly empty. Okay, and so that was one of the major changes that I would make. And so here, let's look at the a close-up. This is the finished painting. And, so here's a detail of the foreground, and we can see the runner running into the picture, and there's that figure looking out of the window. Is he, waiting for her to run by? Does he know what time she's gonna be coming by? Would he like to meet her? Would he, is he waiting for her to come by, to run past him? And, because, if we look over there on the right, we can see a couple in the window that are talking. Maybe they're arguing, maybe they're bickering. So, does this painting represent sort of like a before and after? Here's the couple over on the left before they meet, and then over there on the right after they meet. Uh, because there's again a transformation that takes place when we meet someone. We see someone, oh, we love them, oh, they're wonderful, they're beautiful, but then when we meet them and begin to interact, then there is a transformation that takes place there too, as they become very physically real to us. And that roof in the beginning, that big red shape, I like the red shape, but it needed something. I would look at the painting and it would almost be like saying to me, "Leonard, I need something here." So one of the first things I did was I added the shadows of the birds. And I added the shadows. We didn't have the birds. And after I put the shadows on, I liked the shadows a lot. But then I said, Leonard Kozienski, you need birds to cast those shadows. And so then I added those black birds flying in from the right. First, I had the shadows, and and the runner's casting a shadow. The house is casting a shadow. And here's the middle ground. Okay, and uh, there's that cyclist coming down the road. Is he going to run into that runner? Because when I'm out running, there's cyclists are out running riding around on the roads too, and when I'm out cycling, there's lots of runners and walkers too, and, notice the shadow that he's casting. Oh, interesting. And the children that are playing soccer there, look at their shadows, and the birds are casting their shadows, the houses are casting their shadows. This painting is very much about the shadows that these things cast. How interesting those shapes are by comparison with the things that are actually casting the shadows. And, uh, and then, there was the addition of the smoke, and we'll talk more about that too. But before I go on any farther, those figures, those figures of those children, they're about this big on the painting. Okay. Now, when I'm painting a larger figure about this big, it's a lot easier. When I'm painting something this big, it's difficult because the shapes are very small, and yet the figures have to be convincing. There has to be enough detail there for me to see them as convincing elements in the painting, and yet they're so small. They have to be painted with a tiny brush, and I'm putting down little dots of paint but in the end, I mean, it took me about 3 sessions with these figures, but in the end, I thought they turned out very well. But they were not easy at all. And then here's the distance. And, it's almost nighttime. It could be dawn. There's the moon rising, and then there are the clouds. And then there's that body of water, like the Chesapeake Bay, which I see every morning when I'm running, and there are cargo boats out there. And so I've got a cargo boat in my painting with its lights on. And then there's that little group of sailboats off in the distance. Well, around here, sailboating is a huge thing. And there are a lot of clubs. And there's lots of sailboat races. And sometimes those races go on till almost night. And and so, we can see those little sails out in the darkness sometimes. And they create quite a contrast to the huge volume, those huge cargo boats. Because those little sailboats, they seem almost fragile, almost like little butterflies floating on the water or above the water. And those cargo boats are huge and massive, and, uh, so that, it's quite a contrast, the kind of boats that we see around here. And then there's that car coming down the road, and there's that church over there on the left. Now, around here, there's a ton of churches, lots and lots of churches, and it's an important part of our culture. And when Alexis de Tocqueville, the Frenchman, came to America in the early 19th century and wrote his famous book, Democracy in America, one of the things that he noticed was that there's lots of churches all over the place. And that, it's a religious society, and that this religion is going to provide a moral foundation for this country. as evidenced by all the churches. And so here we have this church over there on the left with the clock tower, the stained glass windows. Oh, again, it's sort of like a symbolic church. It's very idealized. It doesn't represent any specific church here in town. It's sort of just like a churchy kind of building. As with the houses aren't any specific home. They're just more sort of like a symbolic house, which kind of the way I see them when I'm out running in the morning. I mean, each house is different, but they're all kind of the same. And early in the morning, a lot of times they have the lights on, and you can see people inside. And, it's more their housiness rather than any particularity about each individual home. Well, the homeowner himself, he's very focused on the particulars, the color of the house and, how he did the steps and the garden and the front lawn and prune the trees and everything. But for me, there's sort of a general housiness to it all, the civilization that we live in, the suburban world that I run through every morning. And And near the end, I looked at the painting and it still needed something. It was still speaking to me saying, "Leonard, I still need something here." And I looked at the painting and there were those chimneys, but there was nothing coming out of the chimneys. So, and I live right across the street from the steam plant for the Naval Academy, and there's always steam coming out of those smokestacks. And so I added the smoke to the smokestacks. Began this painting in the early spring when people are still burning their wood burning fireplaces, and so there is smoke coming out of the smokestacks, and and smoke rising out of a smokestack, is something that occurs in time. And occurs over time, and so it implies the passage of time. And what I really liked about this compositionally was that it created this diagonal from the upper left to the lower right, going down through the edge of the roofs of the houses and into the shrubbery, creating this nice strong diagonal that sort of divides the painting in half from, sort of close up and far away. So you have this contrast between the up close and the far away worlds united together in this painting. And the smoke does unite the background with the foreground, the top of the painting with the bottom of the painting. And the three smokestacks sort of echo each other's direction, which unites foreground, middle ground, and background. So I thought it was a good addition to this image, especially since the smoke has a very sort of different kind of shape and texture to the sharpness and the edges of the buildings. So in the end, I was real happy with this painting because it described sort of my life, and it was also sort of like a surrealist reinterpretation of my life in that, it was represented the visual quality, the visual aspect of the world, but also combined with sort of like my recreation, my emotional reaction to it, my recreation from memory. So it's a surrealist painting uh, represents my life, but also represents the passage of time and what happens to me when I start my run in the morning, where it's dark and maybe even almost nighttime. Sometimes I can even see the stars. And then as I go through my run, the sun rises, and eventually it's broad daylight when I finish. So it's a painting that transformed over time, and uh, it also evolved over time. And uh, it was a painting that I had to persist with because originally, the idea was somewhat incomplete, and, as I worked on it, it began to speak to me and tell me, what it wanted to become as I worked on it, and as I said, it ended up being I thought, one of my best recent paintings. Also, when we're working on a painting, these ideas in our head, they start off and they can be somewhat vague, and then as we create a painting or a sculpture or whatever, we're transforming that mental image, that idea in our head into a physical reality, into a physical thing. And and when we do that, when we take an idea and make it physical, when we transform it into actual materials, well, those materials transform the idea. They shape the idea, and sort of they create the painting. That is a combination of our ideas and the materials that we're transforming that idea into. And uh, in order for us to do that, we sort of once we start to create that, we have to sort of objectify that thing. Uh, it's not us, it's our creation. And we have to feel free to transform that, to change it, to make additions, subtractions, and to see it as an objective thing that's separate from us. And that was one of the hardest things for me to learn in art school because, you work on something, oh, slavishly, and you put so much of your thought and time into it and your emotions, and then you bring it in for a critique. The professor would just blast it to pieces, and you're like so hurt and like, oh no, oh my God. But that is one of the hardest things to learn in art school, and yet one of the most important because the paintings, they're not us. I mean, they reflect us, and very often they speak about us, but they aren't us. And we have to see them as objective things that are to be transformed, criticized. Uh, and in this case, I finished the painting and thank God I was really happy with it when it was done. But then I had to send it out into the world. Okay, and it's going to live a life of its own. Almost as soon as I posted it online, I got a notice from a collector who wanted to add it to his collection, and so, and that painting is off on its own. It's not me. It's something separate from me, and it's a combination of my thinking, my thoughts, my inspiration with the materials that I would have to transform it into. Well, thank you for listening to this video, watching this video, and letting me talk to you about this painting, how I made it, and the transformations that took place during its creation.
If you like this video, be sure to subscribe, like, and share.
And don't forget to ring the bell.